As mentioned, this is the Milestone 250th episode. 5 years ago, during season 2, I produced my 50th episode, which featured a double interview with fantasy authors John Harrison and Karma Marie Jensen. During season 3, I featured UK-based space opera writer Garrett L. Powell for the 100th milestone. The year after that, during season 4, I interviewed another UK-based sci-fi and horror author by the name of Tim Leben. Then just 2 years ago, during season 5, I interviewed one of my favorites, Jonathan Mayberry. They say never meet your heroes, but it was a fun conversation, and I was blessed to be able to meet him. This season, I am returning back to my milestone roots with a double interview. Here's the first interview featuring my conversation with Daniel Bautz. All right, Daniel, thank you for joining me on the show. It's a pleasure to have you. Tell me about your work and what it is that you write.
So, I try to write adventures for the most part, usually pretty scary. I've written my first published work was a horror novel, just simply because I had monsters in it. But I always like to say it's a little more Indiana Jones than Stephen King. I write thrillers, and then I write kind of spooky middle grade.
So how did you get into writing? Was this something that you've always wanted to do, or was this like you just woke up one day and you're like, I think I'm ready to write a book?
It's kind of both. So growing up, I've always read, I've always told stories. I wanted to be a comic book artist growing up. And for me, like once I realized that it wasn't so much the drawing of the pictures that I enjoyed doing, it was just conveying a story. That's really kind of where that started to turn over in me. Then I tried my hand at filmmaking, again, just trying to be a storyteller. And when it didn't turn out like I had hoped. I kind of gave up on being a storyteller until I had this dog, this amazing dog, and after he was no longer a part of my life, I really missed him, and I kept thinking of him, and so I started writing this story that about a little boy and a dog, and it was really started as a way for me to kind of experience that relationship with the animal again, as odd as that sounds. And just me being who I am, of course, it came out a little spooky. And that really was the process because I had never really considered writing as something that I would do. But once I started on that journey in earnest, I discovered that unlike the other things I'd done creatively, where the end goal, like when I made the movie was what I wanted. It wasn't the work that it took me to get to that end goal that I really cared about. It was having that end goal. It was the same with drawing or painting or graphic design. It was all about that end product. For the first time creatively, writing was about the entire journey.
That's really cool. So obviously, life experiences are an influence for you, but what are some of your other inspirations? Do you draw from movies? Do you draw from music? Are there any authors that you connect with?
I could sit here for an hour and a half and talk about all the authors I connected with, but I'll give you a few that, kind of inspired me to appreciate the written word. And this is going to be kind of cliche because Edgar Allan Poe was really the first time I discovered the written word on a level that showed me that it could be art, more than just a story, that there could be depth to it, and that words could be music. Another one was Mordecai Richler. And I know most people probably don't know him, but he wrote Jacob Tutu Meets the Hooded Fang. He wrote some other adult things, but that was like the first book written for kids that I read that I didn't feel like I was being talked down to. I think a lot of authors who write children's fiction kind of try to talk down to the kids instead of treating them like intelligent human beings. So on the author thing, I definitely draw from movies. I'm a horror movie fanatic, probably to the nth degree. Like, let's put it this way, I met a writer from Fangoria, and I did a little fanboy when I met the writer from Fangoria, the magazine, for my childhood. So that's the kind of horror fan I am. But I knew even the people who were just writing about the movies that were coming out. So that's a huge one. And I draw from music constantly, to the effect that if somebody was really versed in kind of hard rock, heavy metal music, they're going to find a lot of lyrics weaved into my narratives.
That's cool. So what has been one of the hardest parts or one of the biggest challenges that you have faced in the creation of your work?
It is just finding that that voice creatively and that passion, that was hard. I knew I wanted to tell stories, but I didn't look at it as I wanted to tell stories. At first, I thought I was going to draw comic books, but I didn't want to draw Spider-Man. I wanted to draw my own character. And in the end, that didn't work out for me. And then I was like, okay, well, I want to make a movie. And I made two films that probably no one's ever heard of or probably ever will. But after I made the second one, it dawned on me this wasn't the passion, this wasn't the fire. And so I kind of just said, well, maybe this just isn't really what I want, because I wasn't thinking of it as a storytelling. It was kind of discovering myself as a storyteller that was the challenge. I mean, even when I decided that writing was a passion, I had to decide whether I wanted to be a storyteller or a writer. And by that, I mean, do I want to tell stories that entertain people and are accessible to as many people as possible? Or do I want to be, the flowery prose and use big words and be this kind of literary mind? And I definitely, that's really when the idea of being a storyteller settled in on me. I want to tell stories that connect with people.
What advice would you give to other would-be authors out there who are watching this interview or listening to it and trying to decide if this is the direction that they want to go?
I mean, I don't think that if people are really passionate about it, that I have to convince them to keep going. I guess the number one thing I would say to any writer out there, write. No matter what it is, make it a discipline, and whatever that means to you. But make sure you make it a priority in your life to write.
Great advice. So Daniel, we're coming up on the end of the interview. How can people get a hold of you? How can they connect with you? And how can they get a hold of copies of your work?
So you can get a hold of all my books on Amazon. Most of my work is out there in any other the online avenue. So you just have to search for my name. I'm on those platforms. If you want to get a hold of me personally, you can find me at my website, which is danielbautzctp.com. Sign up for my newsletter. I'm a monthly thing. I don't do any more than that. And of course, if you want to find me on social media, the at dbautzy, so that's DBAUTZY. That's the preferred social platform that I have.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me.
And thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So last month's top 10 guest host, Kat Haller, introduced me to my second interviewee for this episode. Not only that, Kat featured his book in the number 2 slot for her top 10 book recs. So join me in welcoming Jonathan Fesmire.
All right, Jonathan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. So tell me about your work and what you write.
So I write steampunk westerns, often with some element of zombies, which is it's an alternate past, an alternate Wild West. But so far my stories mostly take place in California, in Santa Cruz and San Francisco.
Oh, rock! So up around the Bay Area during
yeah, in the 1870s. Yeah,
that is so cool.
So far, but it's going forward in time, as
that's really cool. A lot of history to draw from there too.
There is, yeah, and a lot of history to tweak. And I told you a little about my world. I call it the Creedverse. The main character's name is James Creed. He's called Bodacious Creed by people. Yeah, he was a U.S. Marshal who was very good at getting the criminals. And then he in the first book he's killed early on, and then he's brought back to life as a sort of in the spirit of Frankenstein a little bit, in the sense that technology is used to bring him back. And he's kind of a zombie in the sense that he needs that technology to continue living. There's a lot to it, but anyway, he's brought back.
So how'd you get into writing? Was this something that you've always wanted to do, or did you woke up one day and you're like, I want to write a book?
No, I've wanted to be a writer. I'm one of those rare people who actually became what I wanted to be as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So when I wanted to be a writer from around 10. And what's funny is, so I have I am autistic. I'm on the spectrum. I'm like in what would have been called Asperger's range.
Mm-hmm.
I know I can be very social, but I kind of learned to mask really well. So I didn't start really reading until I was 9.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it's not that I wasn't smart. I just didn't, for whatever reason. And my mom actually kind of attributes it to that I started taking violin lessons when I was 9, and somehow I guess reading them, she thinks that reading the music kind of did something and got me to go, okay. And then of course I jumped up in grade levels super fast on my reading. Um, but it was like not long after that. So I was like 10 when I decided I wanted to be a writer. And I read, a lot. I read so many books, like Judy Blume when I was a kid. But it
Mm-hmm.
was when I got into fantasy, I started reading the Chronicles of Prydain by Laurie Alexander.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, which includes The Black Cauldron, which I'm not a fan of the movie, but the books are so good. But I decided, but it was then I kind of like, wanted to be a writer.
What are some of your inspirations then? I mean, obviously superheroes, obviously steampunk and some science fiction elements. What other areas do you draw from for inspiration?
Stephen King's Dark Tower didn't exist, Bodacious Creed wouldn't exist. And it's not a copy of it or anything like that in any sense. It's just that I'm a really big fan of the Dark Tower cycle by Stephen King. Started reading it when I discovered it when the second book was out, The Drawing of the Three. And am one of those people who was like just eagerly waiting for the next book, and wondering if he was ever going to finish it. But the Dark Tower has a lot of, it's basically Western science fiction slash fantasy. And I love the whole Western sci-fi blend of things. Like I see like The Mandalorian like that.
Hmm.
Obviously Firefly, Westworld. So it inspired me kind of to do my own science fiction Western.
With all of the things that you've been working on for your series, what has been one of the biggest challenges or biggest obstacles that you've encountered?
So the biggest challenge I'm kind of running into with the current novel, because so I have a trilogy out about Bodacious Creed, and I am now writing a spin-off trilogy about his daughter. And the who is also a major character in the first series, but and she's a character that a lot of people really love, and I really love her, and so I wanted to write a series about her. So the biggest challenge with this is keeping is there's some overlap in time. So like I have the three Bodacious Creed novels, and the novel I'm writing now overlaps with book 2 and 3. And in those novels, I did mention that things were going on with her, but I didn't say what they were. So that's what I'm writing about now. And yeah, the challenge is keeping everything. One of the big challenges is keeping everything consistent and making sure everything fits and works. And
Based on what you've learned, what advice would you provide for other would-be authors who are watching this interview and looking to gain some insight from your experience?
okay, I do have some notes. Number one, I would say find what works for you as a
Hmm.
writer, because every writer works differently. So pay attention to other authors, learn what works for them, and give it a try. I've often given things a try. Like I have a friend who writes out her books by hand and then types them up. I tried doing that, didn't work for me. I gotta type them initially. But I found other things that do work. I know that a lot of people like just figuring out the entire story as they go along. They call them, it's called being a pantser. That for me, that slows me down so much. So I definitely recommend making an outline, but be flexible in your outline. So, you may have the whole plan for your book, but you may discover as you get into the minutia, as you get kind of down there on the ground level with the characters and the actual writing, you may realize, wait a minute, this thing that I have planned out is not something that they would do. And so then, be flexible to change it based on how your character would act, so that things stay believable. Keep learning. There's lots of great books on writing out there. There are a lot of writers talking about writing. So, keep learning what other people do and figuring out what works for you. Keep a journal. I write in my journal daily. And yeah, I write about all the really dull stuff going on in my life just to get it down. But journal's great for several reasons. It's a kind of therapy, so you can write about the things that are bugging you, and just having that outlet kind of helps, and it helps you think about things and figure out how to live your life better, or whatever.
Well, Jonathan, we're coming up to the end of the interview here. How can people get a hold of you? How can they connect with you, and how do they get copies of your books?
Okay, so I am on Substack, Threads, and Blue Sky, all all at Jonathan Fesmire, and I'm sure in the doobly-doo you'll put down how to spell.
Yeah, we'll put everything in there.
Yeah, my website is jonathanfesmire.com. As far as getting my books, easily on Amazon. So if you just look me up, Jonathan Fesmire on Amazon, or Bodacious Creed, you'll find them. Of course, my next book is called Anna, Daughter of Creed, and it's the first. So the new trilogy is going to be called the Anna Lynn Chronicles. That will be coming out sometime early next year, as well as a short story collection called Guts and Gears: Tales of the Weird West, which takes place in my Creedverse. And there are going to be 12 stories in there, so that's coming out early next year. So I'm going to have 5 novels in this, 4 novels and 1 short story collection in this world soon.
Very cool. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you.
It was fun. It was nice talking to you, Garrett.
Thank you to Daniel Bautz and Jonathan Fesmire, this month's Author Awareness interviewees. If you want to get copies of their work or connect with them through social media, you'll find all of those links down below. And if you want to see the unedited versions of these conversations, you can find them by becoming a channel supporter on Patreon.